April 4, 1942, 14:00 hours. The Henschel Tank Testing Grounds, Horstenbeck, Germany. The air is cold, tinged with the smell of diesel exhaust, damp pine, and the metallic scent of fresh welding. A small, tense group of men huddle around a hulking, angular metal beast squatting on the muddy track of the Henschel Company's secretive proving grounds. This is the VK30-01D, a prototype medium tank designed by the prestigious automotive firm Daimler-Benz. It is not just another prototype. It is a child of trauma, born from a desperate need. Just months earlier, during Operation Barbarossa, the German invasion of the Soviet Union, the Wehrmacht had encountered the Soviet T-34. The appearance of this tank, with its elegantly sloped armor, wide tracks, and powerful 76.2 gun, sent a shockwave through the panzer divisions. It was a holistic design that outclassed Germany's Panzer IIIs and IVs in mobility, protection, and firepower. The psychological impact, termed T-34 shock, triggered a panic in the German High Command. An emergency meeting of the Panzer Commission was convened. The order was clear and urgent: produce a direct German counter to the T-34 immediately. This prototype before them is Daimler-Benz's answer. It incorporates the clear lessons from the Soviet tank: thick, sloped frontal armor and a potent, long-barreled 75 mm gun. But its suspension system is conventional, even conservative. A traditional leaf spring, twin-bogie setup, with pairs of medium-sized road wheels connected by a leaf spring on a pivot arm. It is simple, reliable, and well understood. Among the men on the track that day is a junior mechanic. His name is lost to history, buried under layers of secrecy, corporate reports, and the colossal noise of the war that followed. He is known only by his function. He is exhausted, overworked, and under immense unspoken pressure. The testing schedule for the VK30-01D is relentless, driven by the frantic demands from Berlin. Every hour of delay is perceived as an hour the T-34 reigns unchecked on the Eastern Front. His task that afternoon is mundane but critical: to reassemble the suspension system on the prototype's left side following a detailed inspection of the running gear. The bogie assemblies have been removed, checked, and are ready to be bolted back onto the hull. The manuals, printed on crisp paper, specify precise tolerances, torque settings for the bolts, and the exact sequence of assembly. They also list every required part, down to the last washer and spacer. But as the mechanic works, his frozen fingers fumbling with cold steel, he encounters a problem. A specific, calibrated spacer washer, designed to ensure perfect alignment and preload on the bogey's pivot bolt, is missing. Perhaps it was misplaced during disassembly, perhaps it was never in the kit. In a perfectly ordered world, the protocol is clear. He should halt work, report the discrepancy to his foreman, and wait for a replacement part to be requisitioned from stores. This would take hours, maybe a day. The test schedule would slip. The engineers in their warm observation bunker would demand explanations. In the high-pressure, fault-intolerant atmosphere of Nazi Germany's weapons development, such a delay could have professional consequences. So the mechanic makes a decision born of fatigue, frustration, and the universal instinct of a tradesman to keep the job moving. He improvises. Instead of tracking down the correct washer, he decides to take up the slack by shifting the entire bogie assembly slightly inward on its mounting axle. He tightens the bolts. The assembly is now cocked at a minute angle. Realizing this misalignment might cause binding or uneven load on the adjacent bogie, he performs the same improvisation on the next bogie unit in line, offsetting it in the opposite direction to compensate. He continues this pattern down the length of the hull. The result is visually unorthodox but mechanically sound to his eye. The pairs of road wheels are no longer neat vertical columns. Instead, they are staggered. Each wheel sits slightly inboard or outboard of its neighbor, their rims overlapping by a few centimeters. It is a bodge job, a fudge, a field expedient to get the tank back on the track. He slaps the hull, signs off on the work ticket, and the VK30-01D is cleared for its afternoon mobility trials. No one, least of all the mechanic, gives the modification a second thought. It is a shortcut, a violation of the design intent. In the precise, rule-bound world of German engineering, it is, by definition, a stupid mistake. The VK30-01D roars to life, its Maybach V12 engine emitting a deep-throated growl that echoes through the forest. It lumbers onto the prepared test circuit, a tortuous course of artificial hills, deep shell craters, water obstacles, and sections of simulated *Panzergraben anti-tank ditch. The purpose is to simulate the worst conditions of the Eastern Front. In the observation bunker, the Daimler-Benz engineers and Heereswaffenamt Army Weapons Office officers watch intently, clipboards in hand. Among them is the project's lead engineer, Dr. Karl Rössler, a man known for his meticulous, almost pedantic attention to detail. Almost from the first moments, the telemetry operators and the test driver himself report something unusual. The tank's ride quality is remarkably smooth. The violent, jolting pitch and yaw, the bone-shaking impacts that characterize tracked vehicle movement over rough ground, are significantly dampened. The prototype feels more stable, more planted to the earth. It maintains a higher average speed over the broken course than any previous iteration. The driver reports improved control and less crew fatigue. In the bunker, the engineers exchange puzzled glances. The performance metrics are clear, but they don't align with the expected behavior of the leaf spring bogey system. The trial concludes, and the tank returns to the servicing area. Dr. Rössler, suspicious, leads a hands-on inspection. It is then, crawling under the muddy hull with a flashlight, that he discovers the mechanic's improvisation. He sees the staggered bogies, the overlapping wheels. His initial reaction is one of pure professional fury. This was a deviation from the sanctioned design. This was botched work. The integrity of the test was compromised. He immediately summons the foreman, demanding to know who was responsible and ordering the suspension to be disassembled and rebuilt to the exact specifications of the blueprint. But as the team prepares to execute his order, Rössler pauses. The data from the run is irrefutable. The tank hadn't just performed adequately, it had excelled in a key parameter, cross-country ride stability, that directly impacted gun-laying accuracy and crew effectiveness. The engineer in him overrode the bureaucrat. He held up a hand. "Halt," he likely said. Instead of reverting the change, he commanded his team to study it. He ordered the suspension on the opposite side of the tank to be deliberately reconfigured to mirror the accidental mistake. They would run a controlled, comparative test. For the rest of the day and into the evening, the team worked, now with deliberate intent. They measured the precise offset, documented the bolt torques on the skewed bogies, and prepared the tank for another run. The results of the comparative trials were conclusive. The interleaved, staggered wheel configuration, *Schachtelaufwerk* in German, provided a quantifiable performance advantage. The mechanics were elegant. In a conventional bogie system, the tank's track draped over distinct, separated points of support. This could create a snapping, whipping effect and concentrated stress. The interleaved wheels created a near-continuous, rolling surface of support along the entire length of the track's upper and lower run. The weight of the tank was distributed more evenly across a greater number of contact points. The overlapping wheels acted like a progressive, interlinked suspension system, damping oscillations and absorbing shocks more effectively. It was a solution that no one had sat down and designed on paper, but one that emerged organically from a mechanical era. Dr. Rössler, his anger now transformed into intense curiosity, wrote a detailed addendum to the test report. He described the accidental modification and its positive effects on ride dynamics and stability. This report, a dry technical document, would become the birth certificate of one of the most distinctive and consequential tank features of WW2. May 1942, Berlin, the office of the Heereswaffenamt and the MAN factory, Nuremberg. The data from Horstenbeck, including Rössler's addendum, entered a cauldron of bureaucratic and technical strife in Berlin. The T-34 shock had triggered not a unified response, but a fractious competition. One faction, including Daimler-Benz and the firm MAN, advocated for a clean-sheet German design that internalized the T-34's lessons. Another faction, influenced directly by Hitler, who was shown captured T-34s, argued for a straightforward copy of the Soviet tank to save time. The Daimler-Benz VK30-01D was part of the former camp. Its overall design was competent, but the report on its suspension caught the specific attention of a pivotal and controversial figure, Heinrich Ernst Niepkamp. Niepkamp was the head of WA Proof 6, the the automotive design office within the Heereswaffenamt. He was not a tanker, but an automotive engineer, a visionary and a fanatic for speed and technical perfection. He saw tanks not as infantry support weapons, but as fast-moving, armored reconnaissance vehicles. He had long championed complex, high-performance suspension systems like torsion bars, which allowed for larger road wheel travel over simpler, rugged leaf springs. Niekampe's philosophy was one of optimized performance at any cost to complexity. The report on the interleaved wheels was a revelation that perfectly aligned with his ideology. He saw in this accidental discovery the mechanical elegance he craved. The Schachtelaufwerk promised an unparalleled, silky smooth ride for high-speed cross-country travel, which in his mind directly translated to a more stable firing platform for the tank's main gun. A tank that could shoot accurately while moving was a revolutionary advantage. But Niekamp, with a coldly analytical mind, saw beyond ride comfort. He identified a secondary, martial advantage inherent in the overlapping design. In a conventional suspension, a single well-placed hit from an anti-tank rifle, a large shell fragment, or a mine could destroy one road wheel or its bogie assembly, often causing the track to derail or the vehicle to ground itself. The interleaved system created a dense, redundant wheel assembly. A projectile that might disable a single bogie on a Panzer IV would now have to pass through multiple overlapping wheels on the Panther. The likelihood of a single hit immobilizing the vehicle was reduced. The overlapping wheels acted as a form of supplemental, spaced armor for the suspension itself. In the close range, brutal duels that characterized tank warfare on the eastern front of WW2, where infantry with anti-tank rifles and guns lurked everywhere, this was a non-trivial tactical benefit. Niekamp threw his considerable bureaucratic weight behind the interleaved design. He mandated it as a core, non-negotiable feature of any new medium tank design. The design competition was fierce. In a dramatic meeting at the Führerhauptquartier in May 1942, prototypes from Daimler-Benz and MAN were presented. The Daimler-Benz design was more directly inspired by the T-34's silhouette. The MAN design, however, had a more traditional German layout with a front-mounted transmission and a three-man turret. Hitler, after reviewing the models, favored the MAN design, but with a crucial caveat: it had to incorporate the sloped armor and long gun. Niekamp ensured that his beloved Schachtelaufwerk was also written into the specification. The MAN design was selected and would become the Panzerkampfwagen V Panther. The mechanic's accidental stagger was now an official requirement for one of the most important weapon systems of the German war effort. The stupid mistake had been codified into law by the most demanding engineering mind in the Panzer Arm. July 5, 1943, 04:30 hours, northern face of the Kursk salient, Soviet Union. Operation Citadel, the colossal German summer offensive aimed at pinching off the Kursk salient, begins with a thunderous artillery barrage. In the pre-dawn gloom, the engines of hundreds of armored vehicles rumble to life. Among them, in the ranks of the elite Grossdeutschland Division and the 39th Panzer Regiment, are the first operational Panther Orf D tanks. They are the new wonder weapons, shrouded in secrecy and imbued with immense expectations. Their crews, though hastily trained on the new machine, have been told they wield a weapon that outclasses anything in the Soviet arsenal. As the attack commences, the Panthers lurch forward across the rolling steppe. What followed was not a triumph of technology, but one of the most disastrous combat debuts for a major weapons system in the history of WW2. Within hours, the battlefield was littered not with burning T-34s, but with immobilized and burning Panthers. The reports that flooded back to command were not of breakthroughs, but of mechanical catastrophe. The interleaved suspension system, so brilliant on the test track, proved catastrophically maladapted to the real-world conditions of the Russian front. The summer of 1943 had seen heavy rains. The rich, black Chernozem soil of the steppe had turned into a thick, glue-like mud known as Rasputitsa. As the 45-ton Panthers churned through it, the mud behaved like a fluid under immense pressure. It was forced with incredible hydraulic force into the narrow, labyrinthine gaps between the overlapping road wheels. It didn't just coat them, it packed into every crevice between the wheels and the suspension arms, between the inner and outer wheels. As the tanks moved on, the mud dried and set, often overnight, into a substance as hard as concrete. The wheels locked solid. The tracks, unable to flex around frozen wheels, snapped under the strain or were thrown completely. The immense torque required to break this concrete grip, or applied when only some wheels could turn, was transmitted directly to the tank's final drive, the delicate set of gears in the front hull that transferred power from the transmission to the drive sprockets. These final drives, a known weak point in German tank design, sheared like glass. A Panther could be immobilized not by enemy fire, but by the very earth it drove over. The maintenance curse of the Schachtelaufwerk became horrifically apparent. Under ideal conditions, replacing an inner road wheel on a Panther was an engineering task. It required first removing up to 9 outer wheels, a process that needed heavy jacks, multiple crewmen, and hours of uninterrupted work. On the battlefield at Kursk, under Soviet artillery fire and sniper attack, it was often impossible. A minor mine damage or a thrown track that would have sidelined a Panzer IV for a few hours could doom a Panther to abandonment. The complex suspension that Neepkamp saw as redundant protection became a logistical nightmare that multiplied the effects of any damage. The smooth ride that promised accurate shooting was irrelevant if the tank couldn't move. Of the roughly 200 Panthers committed at Kursk, historical assessments suggest that by the third day of the offensive, fewer than 40 were operational. The majority were out of action due to mechanical failures directly or indirectly related to the suspension and drivetrain. The deadly advantage had turned lethally against its users. The accidental innovation, born in a clean German workshop, had met the chaotic, dirty reality of total war and had failed spectacularly. Autumn 1943 to 1945. From disaster to dreaded reputation, the disaster at Kursk triggered an emergency re-evaluation. The Panther was not cancelled, the strategic need was too great, but it was subjected to a frantic program of modification. The engineers at MAN and the field workshops of the Eastern Front scrambled to mitigate the flaws of their brilliant, flawed machine. Some solutions were crude. They added raised, rim-like extensions to the outer road wheels in an attempt to shed mud before it could pack into the gaps, a partial fix at best. The factories began installing a powerful, tank-mounted jack and a specially designed retaining bolt to make the Herculean task of wheel changes marginally less horrific. Later models, the ORSF and G, saw minor tweaks to the wheel design and spacing, but the core concept of the interleaved wheels was never abandoned. Neepkamp's faith in the principle remained unshaken, and the production inertia was too great to change. And then a paradoxical thing happened. As the initial egregious teething troubles were slowly worked out, and as the Panther was deployed to different theaters, the true dual nature of the accidental advantage began to assert itself. On the hard, frozen ground of the Russian winter, the mud curse vanished. On the solid roads, firm fields, and hedgerow country of Western Europe following the D-Day landings, the Panther's suspension delivered on its original, promised performance. It gave the heavy tank a ride quality and stability that was the envy of Allied tank designers. This translated into a tangible, lethal battlefield edge. The Panther's combination of thick, well-sloped frontal armor and the high-velocity 75 kW K-42 gun was fearsome, but the suspension enabled a specific, devastating tactic, the hull-down shoot-and-scoot. A Panther could crest a slight rise. Fire its deadly accurate gun with a high probability of a first-hit kill on a Sherman, Cromwell, or T-34 at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters, and then reverse smoothly and quickly back into cover before the enemy could effectively return fire. The stability provided by the interleaved wheels contributed significantly to that accuracy, especially for the crucial first shot. In Normandy, Allied tank crews developed a profound and healthy fear of the Panther. Its distinctive silhouette, with the overlapping wheels, became an instantly recognizable omen of danger. The very feature that had caused its downfall at Kursk was now a part of its terrifying legend. However, the maintenance curse was a constant, grinding counterpoint to this tactical excellence. The Panther remained a maintenance-intensive diva. It required highly trained, meticulous crews and a robust logistics chain for spare parts, final drives, road wheels, track links. As the Allied strategic bombing campaign crippled German industry and the logistical web of the Wehrmacht unraveled, these parts became scarce. A disabled Panther was often a permanently lost Panther. Its complexity meant it had a low in-commission rate compared to simpler Allied tanks. The Sherman, for all its mechanical simplicity and perceived inferiority in gun and armor, could be repaired quickly in field workshops and returned to the fight, often multiple times. The Panther's accidental suspension embodied the German war machine's late-war dilemma, the pursuit of tactical and technical perfection at the cost of strategic sustainability. It was a weapon that helped win engagements, but hastened the loss of the war of attrition. So did the stupid mechanic ultimately create a deadly advantage? The answer is a resounding, paradoxical yes and no. His accidental improvisation solved a genuine, complex engineering problem, damping instability for a heavy, high-performance tracked vehicle in a mechanically elegant and unexpected way. It provided a measurable improvement in gun platform stability, which translated directly into combat effectiveness and higher crew survival rates in tactical engagements. The ballistic redundancy it offered against light weapons was a real, if secondary, benefit. In this sense, the Schachtelaufwerk was a genuine, deadly advantage that contributed to the Panther's formidable reputation and combat record. However, the accident also birthed an inextricable set of crippling flaws. The design was a maintenance superintendent's nightmare, hopelessly overcomplex for the harsh, muddy, and high-attrition environment of frontline combat. It created a critical vulnerability to a specific, common environmental condition, mud, that immobilized more Panthers than enemy gunners in its debut. It contributed to excessive strain on other drivetrain components. The advantage, while real, came with an enormous logistical, reliability, and tactical mobility tax. This tax was one the overstretched, resource-poor German war machine of the later WW2 years could not afford to pay at scale. Therefore, the story of the interleaved wheels is the perfect microcosm of the entire German armaments philosophy in the latter half of the war. It represents the triumph of tactical and engineering idealism over strategic and practical reality. It was a brilliant solution to one set of problems that inadvertently created a worse set of problems. The mechanic's stupid mistake gave birth to a feature that made the Panther both one of the most respected and one of the most reviled tanks of the war, a peak of engineering that was also an albatross around the neck of the Panzer divisions. It was an accidental advantage that helped win individual battles, but whose inherent, accompanying disadvantages contributed decisively to losing the wider war of production, logistics, and reliability. The Panther and its iconic wheels stand as a testament to the fact that in total war, the perfect, complex weapon is often the enemy of the good enough, reliable one. As the war progressed into its final, desperate phase, the Panther's paradoxical nature, a child of accident turned into a weapon of both brilliance and burden, became ever more apparent. The production lines at MAN, Daimler-Benz, and later MNH in Hanover continued to churn out Panthers, each tank a walking testament to the mechanic's serendipitous era. By 1944, the Panther had evolved into the ORSF G, the most numerous variant, featuring a slightly simplified hull with a single-piece side plate and a redesigned commander's cupola. Yet, through all these modifications, the interleaved road wheels remained sacrosanct. They had transcended their origin as a mistake to become the Panther's visual signature, a symbol of German engineering prowess and a source of tactical dread for Allied soldiers. In the bocage country of Normandy following D-Day, the Panther found a terrain that, for a time, played to its strengths. The dense hedgerows created a defensive checkerboard where the Panther's long-range killing power and frontal invulnerability could be maximized. A single, well-camouflaged Panther, hull down behind an earthen hedgerow bank, could dominate a crossroads and hold up an entire Allied advance for hours, its overlapping wheels providing the stable platform for lethal first-round accuracy. The psychological impact was immense. Reports of Panther fright echoed the earlier Tiger fright, with many Allied troops reporting every German tank they saw as a Panther. The interleaved wheels, glimpsed through smoke and brush, became the identifier of this particular terror. The accidental advantage was, in these moments of intense tactical combat, very real and very deadly. However, the Normandy campaign also relentlessly exposed the other side of the coin. The same hedgerows that provided perfect defensive positions also created a close-range, brutal combat environment where the Panther's complexity was a fatal liability. When a Sherman tank, or more often a platoon of Shermans working in concert with infantry, managed to flank a Panther, the battle was often decided not just by gunfire, but by mechanical failure. A hit to the side could not only penetrate, but could also damage the intricate suspension. A thrown track in the confined, muddy lanes of the bocage was often a death sentence, as recovery under fire was next to impossible. The logistical strain of keeping the Panthers running became crippling. Spare parts, especially the fragile final drives and spare road wheels, had to be transporting across a channel increasingly dominated by Allied air power. Field workshops, often just a collection of trucks and tarpaulins, were overwhelmed by the complexity of repairs. A report from the Panzer-Lehr Division in Normandy noted that while the Panther was unmatched in a defensive duel, its mechanical fragility and maintenance demands meant that daily operational strength was often less than 50% of nominal holdings. The tank that was designed for high-speed sweeping maneuvers was now being used as a static pillbox, its sophisticated suspension system largely irrelevant to its actual tactical employment. The advantage had been neutered by circumstance, but the penalties of the design remained, grinding down the Panzer divisions from within. The Allies were not blind to the Panther's qualities or its flaws. Detailed technical intelligence reports, based on captured and destroyed Panthers, were compiled with clinical precision. British and American engineers, examining the Schachtelorf understood its principle immediately. They acknowledged the smooth ride and potential stability benefits. A U.S. Army Ordnance report from late 1944 stated, "The German interleaved suspension provides an exceptionally even distribution of load on the track and contributes to a remarkably steady ride over rough ground. This undoubtedly aids in accurate shooting while moving." However, the same reports were scathing in their assessment of its practicality. They highlighted the prohibitive time required for road wheel replacement, the extreme vulnerability to mud packing, and the unnecessary complexity that made field maintenance a nightmare. The Allied design philosophy, embodied by the M4 Sherman and the Soviet T-34, was moving in the opposite direction, towards greater simplicity, reliability, and ease of mass production and repair. The Panther was studied as an example of technical excellence that had failed the test of wartime pragmatism. It was a museum piece on a battlefield that demanded tools. This German tendency towards over-engineering was not unique to the Panther. Its more famous sibling, the Tiger I heavy tank, exhibited a similar story born from a different set of priorities and, in its own way, another accidental complexity. The Tiger's distinctive overlapping road wheel design, often confused with the Panther, served a different primary purpose. The Tiger's immense weight, over 50 tons, demanded a suspension that could support the load and distribute ground pressure. The overlapping wheels provided that, but they also created a nightmarish maintenance scenario of their own. The inner wheels on the Tiger were notoriously difficult to service, and the system was prone to collecting ice and mud in the Russian winter, which could freeze and lock the wheels just as effectively as on the Panther. The parallel paths of the Tiger and Panther reveal a systemic issue within German WW2 tank design, a cultural and institutional drive for technical oversolution, where performance benchmarks were pursued without sufficient regard for the brutal realities of field maintenance, logistical supply, and the average conscript's ability to perform complex repairs under fire. The stupid mechanics error was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a wider ethos that was then embraced and institutionalized by men like Neepkamp. The accident was the spark. The German engineering culture of the time was the tinder-dry forest. To fully understand the impact of the accidental suspension, we must descend from the strategic overview and enter the cramped, oily confines of the Panther itself, to see it through the eyes of the 5 men who formed its crew: the commander, gunner, loader, driver, and radio operator hull machine gunner. For these men, the Schachtelorf was not an engineering curiosity or a strategic liability. It was a daily fact of life that dictated their survival odds in very direct ways. For the driver and the gunner, the suspension's advantage was tangible. The driver experienced a smoother, less fatiguing ride than in earlier tanks like the Panzer IV, which translated to better concentration during long marches and in combat. For the gunner, the stability was a godsend. When the commander yelled, "Halt!" for a quick shot, the tank's settled motion meant his crosshairs danced less on the target. The first shot hit probability, the single most important factor in a tank duel, was undeniably higher. In after-action interviews, Panther veterans consistently praised the tank's accuracy and the firm firing platform. This was the deadly advantage paying out in seconds of violent action, potentially saving their lives by killing the enemy first. But for the entire crew, especially the driver and the radio operator who doubled as the crew's primary mechanics when outside the tank, the suspension's flaws were a constant, grinding shadow. The pre-combat checklist for a Panther was longer and more arduous than for simpler tanks. Checking the tension on 84 individual rubber-tired road wheel rims on later models was a task in itself. The specter of a thrown track or a damaged wheel loomed over every cross-country movement. They knew that if an inner wheel was damaged, it meant hours of backbreaking, vulnerable labor. In the depths of the Russian winter, the task of extracting frozen, mud-cemented wheels with primitive jacks was not just difficult, it was a battle against the elements that could cost men fingers to frostbite. The crew's relationship with their machine was thus deeply ambivalent. They trusted its gun and its frontal armor with their lives in a fight, but they did not trust its mechanical heart to get them to that fight or away from it. This eroded morale and combat effectiveness in subtle ways. Aggressive maneuver, the soul of armored warfare, was tempered by the fear of a breakdown that could not be fixed. The psychological safety net provided by a robust, reliable vehicle was absent. The crew of a Panther fought not only the enemy, but also the constant anxiety of their own tank's fragility, a fragility directly tied to the elegant, overlapping wheels beneath them. With the end of WW2 in 1945, the Panther's story entered the realm of historical and technical analysis. The victorious Allied powers, particularly the United States, France, Britain, and the Soviet Union, subjected captured Panthers to exhaustive trials. The French army even operated a regiment of captured Panthers for several years post-war, providing a unique long-term study of the tank in peacetime service. The conclusions were unanimous in their contradiction. The Panther was recognized as an outstanding fighting vehicle, well-armed, well-protected frontally, and possessing excellent optical sights. Its suspension was consistently noted for providing an outstanding ride. However, it was also universally condemned as a poor wartime tank. The final drives were chronic failures. The engine was underpowered for the vehicle's weight and prone to overheating and fire. And the interleaved suspension was singled out as a major design flaw. The French reported that even in controlled conditions, maintenance hours per mile of operation were prohibitively high compared to Allied designs. The legacy of the interleaved wheel was therefore one of fascinating failure. It entered the DNA of post-war tank design not as a feature to be copied, but as a cautionary tale. When the next generation of main battle tanks was designed in the 1950s and 1960s, the American M48 Patton, the British Centurion, the Soviet T-54-55 all opted for simpler, more robust suspension systems, torsion bars or advanced hydropneumatic units with clearly spaced, non-overlapping road wheels. Ease of maintenance, reliability, and strategic sustainability had decisively won out over the pursuit of a perfect ride. The deadly advantage had been judged, in the cold light of post-war analysis, to be not worth the cost. Niekampp's vision of the high-performance, complex Panzer was a dead end. The future belonged to balanced designs that married firepower, protection, and mobility with ruggedness and simplicity. So we return to our original question, now layered with the full weight of history. How did one stupid mechanic accidentally create a deadly advantage? He did so by solving an immediate, tactile problem in a moment of pressure, inadvertently revealing a mechanical principle that offered real benefits. The advantage was real: enhanced stability, improved accuracy, a degree of ballistic redundancy. It contributed to the Panther's fearsome tactical reputation and undoubtedly saved the lives of German tank crews in countless sharp, violent engagements across the fields of Ukraine and the hedgerows of Normandy. But the story does not end there. The accident was not contained. It was seized upon by an engineering culture that prized technical perfection above all else, institutionalized by a bureaucrat with a vision, and stamped into thousands of tanks. In doing so, the accidental solution was transformed into a deliberate source of fatal weakness. The advantage came shackled to crippling penalties in maintainability, reliability, and strategic utility. It created a tank that was magnificent in a snapshot but unsustainable in a marathon. It epitomized the central flaw of Germany's later WW2 arsenal, the creation of weapons that were too good for the war they were in. The final verdict is thus etched in the rusting relics in museums and the clear design choices of every modern tank that followed. The mechanic's stupid mistake created a temporary, tactical advantage that helped win moments, but it also helped forge a strategic millstone that contributed to losing the war. It is a story that resonates far beyond tank design. It is a lesson about the perils of optimizing for the wrong metrics, of allowing tactical genius to blind strategic wisdom, and of how the pursuit of perfection can become the enemy of the good enough to win. The Panther's interleaved wheels roll on in history, not as a symbol of pure engineering triumph, but as a powerful, complex, and deeply contradictory monument to the unintended consequences of a simple human error made on a cold afternoon in 1942.